Hey guys, tonight we're slipping barefoot along the cool banks of the Nile, under a sky so dark it seems to swallow the stars whole. You can almost smell the wet reeds and the faint scent of roasted barley drifting from a nearby hut. A young woman hums a lullaby to her baby, swaying gently beneath a flickering oil lamp. You feel the soft thump of a clay door closing and the sand sifting beneath your toes. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where women carry babies, burdens, and the quiet architecture of daily life on their shoulders. But don't get too cozy. Childbirth here involves no epidurals, and let's just say you probably wouldn't survive the first week without your amulets, fertility charms, or a particularly tolerant goddess on your side. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and what time it is where you're watching. I love seeing our little bedtime crew scattered across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mother you're watching? She's not just rocking a baby, she's holding 1,000-year-old cultural script in her arms, one passed down through dynasties like family recipes and treasured amulets. She hums a song that echoes the goddess Isis, protector of children, mistress of magic, and poster deity for tough love and loyalty. Her hair's braided tight, held with palm thread ties. Her linen dress is coarse but clean. She's neither queen nor priestess, just a typical village woman. But don't let the simplicity fool you. Her role is deeply political, economic, even spiritual. In ancient Egypt, a woman like this doesn't only belong to her family, she belongs to the social engine. She's the weaver of daily life, the one who keeps everyone fed, clothed, soothed, and silently schooled. Your ears catch the hiss of lentils hitting a hot stone pan. Dinner's underway. And sure, she won't get credit in temple carvings or statues, but let's be honest, even pharaohs probably came crawling to someone like her when they had a fever and needed fennel tea. She kisses her baby's forehead, and you notice something carved into the mudbrick above her bed, a simple symbol of Hathor, goddess of motherhood, music, and cows. Yes, cows. A reminder that every woman, no matter how poor, shares a divine lineage. Even the most ordinary gestures, braiding hair, mixing bread, lighting incense, are drenched in cosmic meaning. Historians still argue whether women in ancient Egypt truly had more freedom than in other ancient civilizations. But walk through this village and it feels freer than you might expect. Women own land. They can inherit property. They even appear in court records not as footnotes, but as plaintiffs and defendants, demanding justice with the same eyeliner winged stare they use on their kids. The woman's name? Maybe it's Henut or Satsobek, common beautiful names that mean things like mistress of offerings or daughter of the crocodile god. She stirs the lentils with a stick smooth from years of use and looks up at the stars, probably wondering if the river will flood early this year. Her concerns aren't small, and neither is her reach. Just a few huts down, her sister is dyeing linen using crushed indigo, while her youngest tends the family goat. These aren't passive housewives. They're economic players, religious actors, mothers, managers, midwives, and, if the gossip around the well is true, occasional political influencers. That old man sitting by the fire? He calls his wife Nebet Per, mistress of the house. That's not just a term of endearment, it's a legal and social status. It means she manages the household budget, negotiates grain exchanges, and probably keeps the neighbors in line too. Want proof? Papyrus contracts from the Middle Kingdom show women buying homes, leasing land, and even lending silver with interest. Not bad for a society that existed over 4,000 years ago. But before you paint a picture of perfect balance, let's slow the chariot. Power here is still filtered through class, lineage, and favor with the gods. A high-ranking priestess can wield spiritual authority, sure, but a field worker like the woman you're watching, she has to summon her strength quietly, in the way she raises her daughters to survive and her sons to respect the divine feminine. A quirky little detail. Some scholars believe women used to chew natron, yes, the same stuff used in mummification, to clean their teeth. Imagine popping a mouthful of salty baking soda every morning instead of Colgate. Ancient glow-up routine, anyone? Your village mother settles in for the night. Baby finally asleep. She traces her fingers over the amulet hanging above the bed, an eye of Horus for protection. The baby stirs. She murmurs a prayer under her breath, something old and sacred, like a spell half remembered. Outside, the stars wheel overhead. Crocodiles float silently in the Nile, their eyes glinting like gods in the moonlight. You shift in your seat, the soft hum of history in your ears. One ordinary woman, one ordinary night, but through her hands, ancient Egypt breathes. Word. You're up early again. The sky's barely lit with the watery light of Ra's first rays, and already the village is stretching, yawning, coughing smoke into the air from clay ovens. But you're headed to a much more sacred space this morning, a mudbrick birthing hut, warm with the scent of palm oil, incense, and something else, something more primal. Inside, the scene is anything but calm. A woman leans forward on her knees, gripping a polished birthing stone shaped like a lioness. Two midwives are with her, both older, both calm in that steely, I've done this 60 times kind of way. One hums, the other murmurs instructions. A wet nurse stands ready nearby, swaying a copper rattle for the soon-to-arrive child. You crouch close, watching. There's no white linen hospital gown, no soft monitor beep, just sweat, chanting, a flickering flame, and the sharp smell of blood and herbs. Birth in ancient Egypt is raw, sacred, and anything but quiet. The birthing brick, those strange painted blocks you're now seeing beneath her knees, is actually steeped in religious symbolism. They're inscribed with protective spells, little vignettes of the goddess Taweret, part hippopotamus, part lion, part crocodile, 100% terrifyingly adorable. She's the ancient version of a doula, midwife, and baby bouncer rolled into one. The Egyptians didn't separate the sacred from the everyday, especially not during childbirth. Every push is a prayer. Every scream is an invocation. The mother's face is slick with oil and fear, but also purpose. Because she's not just birthing a child, she's delivering another soul into the balance of Ma'at, the cosmic order. No pressure, right? And here's a wild one for your mental trivia jar. Some texts describe women squatting on birthing stools shaped like goddesses. Imagine delivering your baby while sitting on Hathor's lap. Awkward, divine, or both? Birth wasn't just a physical ordeal, it was a spiritual rite. Women surrounded themselves with amulets, fish-shaped ivory wands, scarabs, even tiny carvings of the dwarfish household god with a tongue-sticking-out grin and a ferocious talent for scaring off evil spirits. Bez might not look like much, but he's your best friend in labor. And in an era with no antibiotics, you really want all the divine help you can get. Historians still argue whether Egyptian women had formal medical training or if midwifery was passed down informally. Either way, the midwives knew their stuff: herbs to ease pain, spells to invoke divine assistance, and which direction to face so that Isis herself might smile down on the child. And speaking of Isis, you've probably seen her cradling baby Horus in statue form, looking suspiciously like Mary and baby Jesus. That's not a coincidence. The image of Isis nursing her divine son became so iconic it outlasted empires and even made its way into early Christian art. She was the original Mother of God figure, complete with wings, magic, and a very tight family trauma arc. But back to our village woman, her screams reach a crescendo. The midwife yells something encouraging, the wet nurse moves closer, and then finally a cry, new, shrill, unmistakable. A baby is born. Wrapped in soft linen and doused in oil, the baby is handed not to the mother first, but to the wet nurse. Why? Well, elite women often didn't nurse their own babies. That was outsourced to trusted women, often of lower class, who held deep knowledge of child rearing and, fun fact, sometimes received gifts like sandals or amulets shaped like tiny feet for their service. The mother slumps back, exhausted. Someone rubs resin on her wrists and whispers a blessing. The grandmother lights more incense, frankincense if you're curious, and sprinkles natron by the doorway. It smells like hope and salt. As the sun brightens over the horizon, the whole house buzzes with relief. There will be a naming ritual, sure, and probably a beer-heavy celebration later if the family can afford it. But for now, all eyes are on the infant, swaddled in magic and muscle memory, held by women whose names won't make it into temple walls, but whose hands shape dynasties. And let's not forget the truly quirky bit. Ancient Egyptians believed the placenta had spiritual value. Some families buried it beneath the home as a kind of life anchor. Others dried it out, mixed it with honey, and, brace yourself, ate it for strength. Yum, you wander outside, blinking against the light. The Nile glimmers like a line of molten gold. Somewhere, a child cries and a priest chants to the sky. You think about how each Egyptian birth, whether in a palace or a peasant's hut, carried cosmic consequences. Every woman who gave birth brought not just a child, but balance, possibly even future royalty, into the world. And the wet nurse who's now softly humming by the doorway, she's not just a placeholder, she's revered. Some even rose to status in court, like Maya, wet nurse of the boy king Tutankhamun. Her tomb shows her standing close to the royal family, draped in finery, proof that holding a baby in Egypt could also mean holding power. In this moment, surrounded by the scent of new life and the flicker of oil lamps, you sense something ancient and deeply modern. The labor, the pain, the whispered prayers, it's all so familiar, and it makes you wonder, how many untold empires have been built from the quiet courage of women behind mudbrick walls? Word count. The sun is high now, heating the Nile into a silver ribbon that slices through fields of green and gold. You're trudging past stalks of wheat almost as tall as you are, and every step kicks up a dry, earthy scent. Beside you, a little girl named Maquette waves off a lazy fly and tightens her grip on a basket woven from date palm leaves. She's barefoot, sun-kissed, and already more capable than most CEOs. You're here to shadow her daily life, and trust me, she doesn't slow down for visitors. Maquette is the daughter of a farmer and a weaver, which makes her what you might call middle class, if such things existed then. She's around 8 or 9, already tasked with gathering vegetables, feeding the goats, helping her mother with loom work, and learning which gods to pray to for good harvests and fewer insect bites. Her family, like most in ancient Egypt, relies on the land. And though land ownership is often associated with men, here's the twist. Miket's mother technically owns the plot they farm. Women in ancient Egypt could inherit and bequeath property, which wasn't just some progressive quirk, it was written into law. So while her dad might plow the fields, her mom calls the shots when it comes to storing grain, selling produce, or trading for sandals with that slick merchant downriver. You trail behind as Meket skips to a small shrine on the edge of the farmland. She places a handful of crushed grain in a shallow bowl beneath a carved figure, Renenutet, the snake-headed goddess of nourishment and harvest. It's a quick offering, but sincere. Meket's mother told her the goddess rewards grateful children with full bellies and strong bones. Not a bad trade, really. The Egyptians didn't have public schools as we think of them. Literacy was for the privileged, usually boys of elite families training to be scribes. Girls like Meket, they learned what they needed from their mothers and grandmothers through hands-on work and religious storytelling. A cooking fire could be a classroom. A weaving lesson, a masterclass in patience, geometry, and curse suppression when your shuttle snaps for the 5th time. Historians still argue whether working-class girls had any access to formal education or if there were exceptions for particularly gifted children. Occasionally, tomb inscriptions hint at women who could read or write, but it's rare enough to remain mysterious. Still, one thing's certain, Meket's education is no less important just because it's unwritten. As she walks you through her day, you see her absorbing everything. How her mother checks the sun's position to time the irrigation. How she folds dough just right so it doesn't crack in the oven. How she scrapes pigment from dried flowers to color the family's festival tunics. And then there's the animals. Meket knows which goat's milk tastes sweeter, which hen is faking her egg laying, and which cat belongs to the neighbors, even though it keeps stealing fish. She's basically the CFO of this backyard micro-empire. One of the fringe facts scholars still squint at, some young girls were apparently trained in musical or religious roles, particularly in temples dedicated to goddesses like Hathor. It's possible Meket's future could involve singing hymns or rattling a sistrum to wake the gods from their afternoon naps. But for now, her stage is a dirt courtyard, and her audience is a slightly annoyed chicken. She twirls for you anyway. Meket's life may seem simple, but you start to notice the layers. Her mother's instruction isn't just about chores, it's about survival and identity. When they weave linen, each pattern carries meaning. When they cook, each herb has a story. There's pride in the work and pride in the way it's passed on. Egyptian society was deeply hierarchical, sure, but women found power in continuity. in knowing how to bake a bread loaf exactly the way their great-grandmother did, in keeping the family gods happy even if no one else was watching. And here's your quirky detail for the day. Some Egyptian families believed in household ghosts, protective spirits of ancestors who hung around just long enough to make sure the cooking fire didn't go out and the toddlers didn't fall into the Nile. If you left out a little beer and bread at night, they might even help you out. Or at least not knock over your oil lamp in passive-aggressive ghost fashion. As the sun begins its slow drift toward the western hills, Make-It and her mother sit in the shade and crack open a pomegranate. The red juice stains their fingers as they talk about nothing and everything. You're reminded again how much of a girl's education came not from scrolls, but from presence, from rhythm, from being folded gently every day into the living fabric of Egypt. You lean back against a warm stone and feel it buzz faintly with heat and history. The sound of the river is steady, distant, familiar. Make-It tosses you a half-eaten fig and grins. Maybe tomorrow she'll show you how to tie reeds into a mat. Or maybe she'll just ignore you and go catch frogs. Either way, she'll be learning. And if you're smart, you will too. You're wiping pomegranate juice off your hands as Make-It tugs you along toward a different part of the village, quieter, more shaded, with the faint scent of crushed myrrh hanging in the air. This is where the women get ready, not for a ceremony or a royal banquet, just for daily life. But don't be fooled. Here, beauty isn't vanity. It's identity, status, and sometimes survival. The hut you enter is dim, but you can make out rows of clay pots, stone pallets, and a big chunk of polished copper used as a mirror. One woman is already bent over a small basin, lining her eyes with thick black coal. Her name is Kia, and she's a linen dyer by trade, but you might mistake her for a beauty priestess with the way she moves, calm, precise, almost ceremonial. Her fingers are stained with dye, but her hair is braided tight and neat. In Egypt, your hairstyle speaks before you do. A married woman might wear her hair in a long, curled tail. A younger girl could have side locks, a kind of ancient ponytail that screams, "I'm not married yet, but I do braid with skill." And if your head's shaved, well, you're either a priestess, a child, or just really hot in this desert. Egyptian grooming wasn't just about fashion. It was survival against heat, sand, and lice. You'd definitely be applying liberal amounts of scented oils, partly to soften skin and partly to keep the bugs at bay. And yes, they had their version of deodorant, often made from crushed frankincense or citrus peels. You're welcome. As Kia shows you her tools, a smooth coal stick, a piece of pumice, and a pot of copper-rich malachite, you realize every item in her kit is also a social cue. Coal wasn't just eyeliner. It was believed to protect eyes from the sun and ward off evil spirits. Win-win. The green eye paint? That's a nod to Hathor, and maybe a flex about her trade connections. Malachite came from the Sinai mines, after all. She lets you try it. Careful, don't poke your eye. The stick drags a little, and suddenly you feel both ridiculous and oddly powerful. You're ready to channel your inner deity, or at least intimidate a few goats. But Kia's not done yet. She pulls out a vial of perfume, a thick syrupy oil infused with lotus. It smells like sweet earth and forgotten temples. And here's a fun fact. Perfume cones, those little waxy pyramids sometimes shown on tomb paintings sitting on people's heads, those were real. Maybe. Historians still argue whether they were literal headwear or just symbolic. Either way, you're glad you're not walking around with a melting cone of myrrh dripping into your eyes right now. One of the younger women in the hut rolls her eyes at your reaction. She's braiding a wig, yes, a wig, into a fine, elaborate plait. Wigs were a must-have, especially for elite women. Human hair was expensive, goat hair was cheaper, and if you had a mix of both, you were basically the Kylie Jenner of Thebes. The class lines in Egyptian beauty practices were subtle but firm. A highborn woman might have her kohl imported and applied by a servant. A worker like Kia does it herself, but still takes pride in the symmetry. And the richer you are, the smoother your linen. Coarse linen? You're working class. Superfine, almost transparent linen? You're either nobility or seriously over budget. As the sun shifts, the women start gathering their things. There's work to be done. Kia needs to finish a bolt of dyed linen for a merchant's wife, and the girl with the braids has to help prepare her older sister for a marriage meeting. But before they scatter, There's laughter, a joke about someone's crooked eyeliner, and a teasing pinch on the arm. You see it clearly now. This isn't just a makeover hut. It's a place of social bonding, whispered advice, and generational wisdom. And speaking of quirky customs, elite women sometimes carry tiny cosmetic boxes shaped like ducks. Yes, ducks. Picture a compact where the duck's wings open up to reveal compartments for rouge and kohl. Functional? Questionable. Fabulous? Absolutely. You step outside, blinking against the light. Suddenly, the whole village looks different. Every braid, every bracelet, every faint scent of lotus oil is a signal, a story, a warning, a love letter. This is how women move through the world here, not invisibly but encoded. And it's not just about being seen, it's about being known. You're already sweating as you walk along a dusty path that leads away from the reeds and toward a squat building made of sun-dried bricks. It's not much to look at, no pillars, no gold, not even a painted doorway, but inside it hums with a different kind of power, knowledge. This is a scribal school, and today something rare is happening. A girl is walking through its doors. Meet Jehutihotep's daughter. Let's call her Renifer. Her father is a mid-level official in the temple granary, and unlike most, he's decided that his daughter should learn to read and write. Risky? A little. Unusual? Definitely. Revolutionary? For her, maybe. The odds aren't in her favor. Formal education in ancient Egypt is mostly for boys, especially those on track to become scribes, priests, or administrators. Girls are expected to learn domestic tasks, cooking, weaving, making perfume, and the delicate art of not getting caught eavesdropping on grown-up conversations. Literacy? That's usually not part of the curriculum. Historians still argue whether girls were officially barred or simply excluded by social inertia. But papyri show that a few women did become scribes, enough to raise eyebrows and questions. One notable example, a woman named Nefertiti, not the queen, but a scribe with her own tomb inscription calling her Seshat's daughter. Seshat, the goddess of writing, must have been proud. Inside the school, Renifer sits cross-legged on a mat next to boys her age, gripping a reed pen and squinting at a scrap of astrakhan, broken pottery used for practice writing. Her first task, copying the same line over and over. Words endure longer than monuments. You can't help but smirk at the irony. Her name may not be carved on a temple wall, but here she is, shaping the future one ink stroke at a time. The teacher, a thin man with dark smudges under his eyes and the patience of a crocodile, circles the room. He pauses over Renifer's shoulder, nods, doesn't smile, but doesn't scoff either. That's basically a standing ovation by ancient standards. Her mother waits outside, wringing her hands and pretending not to be proud. She's already heard whispers from the neighbors. Why waste ink on a girl? She won't be a priest or a tax scribe. She'll marry, have babies, and forget how to spell hippopotamus. But her mother knows better. A literate woman is a powerful woman, even if that power hides behind laundry lines and temple steps. You watch as Renifer learns to mix ink from soot and gum, how to hold the reed just right, how to chant the syllables as she writes. Her fingers cramp, her back aches, but her eyes shine. A quirky tidbit you overhear from the teacher. Apparently, some early students tried to bribe their way out of lessons with dates or little carved amulets. Imagine trying to pass your math class with a really nice scarab. Sadly, it didn't usually work. Renifer keeps practicing. Day after day, her hieratic script, Egyptians' everyday handwriting form, grows neater. She starts writing not just temple hymns and account ledgers, but poems, little ones, secret ones, stuff about the lotus blooming in the morning light and how her older brother picks his nose when no one's watching. Meanwhile, outside the school walls, most girls continue their learning in entirely different ways. A younger cousin of Renifer's is in the kitchen this morning, memorizing her mother's instructions on how to fold bread dough over a date paste center without breaking the crust. Her education is oral, tactile, practical. No ink required, but no less essential. What becomes clear is that education in ancient Egypt wasn't either or, it was layered. Girls might not write on scrolls, but they were learning daily how to run a household, maintain spiritual balance, and make the perfect barley cake with a smile and zero instructions. They didn't call it home economics. They called it Tuesday. Still, for girls like Renifer, literacy offered a quiet kind of rebellion, a door into the sacred, the administrative, the intellectual. One well-inked scroll could shift an inheritance, document a court case, or preserve a prayer forever. Words here are more than knowledge, they're leverage. And remember this, most scribes were men, yes, but scribes wrote what the women told them. The dowries, the recipes, the testimonies. Even the sacred hymns praising Isis and Hathor likely began as words whispered by women in temple courtyards. The day ends with Renifer's fingers stained black and her shoulders stiff. She walks home under the deepening sky. The smell of baked clay and goat sweat thicken the air. Her mother meets her with a jar of fig beer and a nod that says, "You made it through another day of becoming someone they won't expect." You trail behind, watching this small shift in the sand. Just one girl and her ink-stained dreams. But in a world built on names carved into stone, she's quietly proving that girls can write their own. You wake before dawn, the air thick with incense and early bird song, only to find yourself surrounded by absolute silence, reverent, expectant. Today you're not following a village girl or a market mother. Today you're entering sacred space. No sandals beyond this point. Welcome to the domain of temple women. You pad across smooth stone into the outer courtyard of a temple, the scent of burning resin curling through the halls like a spirit unsure where to settle. Columns rise around you, carved with stories you can't quite read but deeply feel. Prayers, offerings, maybe gossip immortalized in stone. You can hear faint chanting, soft and steady like wind humming in a bottle. And then movement. A group of women in crisp, snow-colored linen glide past you. One carries a sistrum, that holy rattle shaped like a rounded arch. It jingles softly in her hand. These women are priestesses of Hathor, goddess of music, joy, motherhood, and the occasional wine-fueled chaos. This isn't some casual religious club. To be a priestess in ancient Egypt, especially of a major deity, was to hold a position of social, spiritual, and sometimes even political weight. These women weren't background singers in a male-dominated chorus. They were the show. But don't go picturing them as high-powered CEOs with golden staffs just yet. There's a twist. Temple priestesses were expected to remain ritually pure. That meant frequent baths, avoiding certain foods, and sometimes lifelong celibacy, depending on the era, the deity, and whether the local priesthood leaned traditional or live and let love. Historians still argue whether most of these women lived like nuns or had more flexible behind-the-curtain arrangements. Your sandals are in your hands now, the stone beneath your feet cool and polished. One priestess beckons you closer. She's young, maybe 17, but she holds herself like someone twice that. Her name is Iui, and today she's in charge of the morning ritual. She dips a carved ladle into a basin and anoints a statue of Hathor with scented oil, her hands steady. Her chants rise in volume and confidence, each syllable invoking life, fertility, and a solid harvest season. The statue isn't just a symbol, it is Hathor. And Iui isn't praying to her, she's feeding her, dressing her, singing her awake. Now imagine the weight of that. Feeding a goddess breakfast every morning. Some roles in the temple were musical. Women played instruments, harps, flutes, sistra, and sometimes danced. Not for human entertainment, mind you, but to literally entertain the gods. Your job might include shaking your rattle just right so the goddess doesn't get cranky. Or worse, silent. And here's your quirky bit. One of Hathor's epithets was Lady of Drunkenness. So yes, temple festivals sometimes involved wine. A lot of it. Dancing, music, laughter. And the women leading these rituals? The same ones you're watching now, serene as they tidy the altar. Duality was the name of the game in Egypt. You could be holy and joyful, sacred and sensuous, a caretaker of both ritual silence and wild, head-thrown-back celebration. Of course, not all temple women were equals. There were ranks. Some cleaned altars. Others performed chants. A few held the elite title, God's Wife of Amun, a high priestess role that sometimes came with political influence, wealth, even property. For centuries, this position was reserved for royal women, often unmarried daughters of pharaohs who wielded real power in Thebes. You can still feel that hierarchy in the glances passed between the women. Who gets to touch the sacred statue? Who holds the incense? Who bows deepest? The temple is a house of gods, but it runs a lot like any royal court, with grace, politics, and the occasional power shuffle. I leads you into a chamber deeper within the temple. Here, no light penetrates, except for a thin beam directed perfectly onto a golden offering table. She whispers a prayer to Hathor, asking for protection, clarity, and probably a little patience. You wonder what secrets she holds, who she was before she shaved her head and stepped barefoot into this other world. Historians speculate whether these women stayed in the temple for life or rotated in and out with rituals. Some may have gone back to families, returned to marriages, even raised children. But here, in this stone-walled sanctum, there's something else entirely. Not wives, not daughters, just vessels for divine sound, sacred hands in motion. And if you're still clinging to modern assumptions about ancient gender roles, consider this. Priestesses sometimes wielded more access to the divine than their male counterparts. Their touch alone could wake a god statue. Their voices were believed to please deities in a way men simply couldn't. If that's not power, what is? Before you leave, EU presses a small amulet into your palm. It's shaped like a cow's ear, Hathor's symbol of listening. A reminder, she says, that the goddess hears women most clearly, that their voices, their offerings, their presence are not just welcome, but essential. You step outside, blinking in the blinding sunlight. The world feels louder now, rougher somehow. The chants are behind you, but they still echo, tucked under your skin like something sacred and humming. And you think, the women of the temple didn't shout to be heard. They whispered, and Egypt listened. Word count note 100. You wake to the smell of lemon oil and hot bread, and for a moment you think you're still in the temple, but then you hear music, strings, laughter, and the unmistakable flap of linen in the breeze. Today's different. You're invited to a wedding, and not just any wedding. This one comes with ink. The bride is a young woman named Tia, and she's pacing the courtyard like a cat in a linen cage. Her hair is tightly braided, laced with lapis beads that clack softly every time she turns. She's not nervous about saying vows. She's nervous about signing her marriage contract. Because yes, contracts are involved, and in ancient Egypt, marriage wasn't just romance or a religious rite. It was business, legal, documented. The table in front of her is set with the essentials: papyrus, a reed pen, and a small pot of black ink. Her groom, a slightly overwhelmed papyrus maker named Beck, fidgets beside the scribe, who's already dripping sweat despite the early hour. But here's what's interesting. Tia isn't just a passive participant. She helped negotiate this contract. She knows what's written there, what property she's bringing into the marriage, what she's entitled to if it ends, and even what gifts she's guaranteed on major festivals. No vague promises. Everything is spelled out like an ancient prenup with sandals. The scribe clears his throat and begins to read aloud. It sounds dry, literally, because the ink keeps drying too fast in the sun. But the meaning is powerful. Tia will keep the land her mother gave her. If Beck leaves her, or Ra forbid, dies in some dramatic crocodile incident, she retains rights to half his estate. And if they separate peacefully, she gets her grain, her goats, and her linen bolts back. All of it. Historians agree that this legal autonomy set Egyptian women apart from many of their contemporaries in other ancient societies. Greek women, for example, couldn't own property or appear in court on their own. But here, in this sun-baked courtyard, Tia just signed her name to her own financial independence. In eyeliner, no less. You can almost hear the collective sigh of future divorce lawyers. After the formalities, the real celebration begins. Neighbors gather, flutes and tambourines kick up, and someone brings out a jug of date wine that's older than the groom's beard. Tia's friends lift her veil and squeal over her necklace, which was passed down from her great-grandmother, a small amulet of the goddess Nephthys, known for her protective vibes and dramatic flair. The bride's mother leans in and whispers something that makes Tia laugh so hard she snorts. You don't need to know the language to guess. It's probably something about the wedding night and how the groom better know which side of the bed not to hog. You might be wondering, was love part of all this? Actually, yes. While marriages were often practical, love poems from the time are surprisingly tender. They speak of stolen glances by the river, the scent of a lover's hair, the thrill of walking beside someone without your sandals touching. If you're lucky, your heart gets involved too. But even without love, the legal bond gave women protection, something that wasn't taken for granted. A woman could initiate divorce. She didn't need a male relative to speak on her behalf in court, and often she kept custody of the kids. That's a pretty progressive setup for a civilization that also believed in dung-based sunscreen. Now for your fringe fact of the day. In rare cases, some marriage contracts included clauses about household behavior. There's one record where the wife secured the right to throw her husband out if he insulted her mother more than 3 times in a month. You can almost hear the ancient petty drama. Back at the party, Tia and Beck exchange garlands of blue lotus and dance under palm fronds. There's food everywhere: roasted duck, honey pastries, figs, and the scent of warm coriander hangs heavy in the air. No wedding planner here, just generations of women passing down what works. Scent the oils, chill the beer, and for goodness sake, seat Aunt Ty away from the musicians if you don't want unsolicited tambourine solos. As the sun begins to dip, casting golden shadows across the courtyard, Tia touches the ink on her contract one last time. It's dry now, set, just like her future, complicated, protected, and entirely hers. You slip away from the crowd, carrying the sound of laughter and tambourines with you, and you think, in a world where so much is decided by birth and station, here's a woman who just wrote her own terms. Not a bad start to forever. You wake to the rhythmic slap of wet linen on stone and the low murmur of women gossiping over the rush of the morning water run. You're back in the heart of the village, where the air smells like soap root, sun-baked clay, and whatever was left over from last night's fish stew. But don't let the humble scene fool you. This is a stronghold. And the woman at its center? She's the Nibet Per, the literal lady of the house. Today, you're trailing behind Hedifears. Not a queen, but not exactly average either. She's the matriarch of a multi-generational household, which means she's not just managing chores. She's running a business, a child care center, a food distribution system, and what might be Egypt's first unofficial HR department. She doesn't wear a crown, but when she enters a room, everyone stands a little straighter. Even the cat. The title, Nebet Per, wasn't ceremonial. It was legal and practical. It indicated a woman who governed her domestic domain. And yes, that included slaves, servants, property, livestock, and probably her husband, even if he wouldn't admit it out loud. She wasn't expected to sit quietly with her hands folded. She was expected to run things. You watch her measure out grain from storage jars, record it with notches on a palm stick, and delegate who's going to the market and who's staying to clean the loom weights. A daughter-in-law tries to sneak away from scrubbing a grinding stone and gets the look. An expression so ancient it's probably painted on the walls of tombs. What's fascinating here is how much authority she wields without raising her voice. Egyptian women in the household sphere had clear legal identities, especially in comparison to their counterparts in places like Mesopotamia. If Hedifears wanted to lease a piece of land, she could do it. If she wanted to lend some barley with interest, she'd draw up a receipt on Ostrakhan and demand collateral. She could even sue someone in court, husband included, if she felt her rights had been trampled. Historians still argue how much of this power was evenly distributed across classes, but the record shows that women like Hedifears, married, middle class, deeply embedded in the rhythms of daily life, could absolutely flex legal and economic muscle. Sometimes in sandals, sometimes barefoot, she leads you through the family courtyard, pointing out repairs needed on the granary lid, shouting for someone to scrub the olive press, and pausing only to kiss a sleepy toddler on the head. Her husband is inside, writing something important looking, probably poetry about the Nile, which is great, really. But without her, they'd be out of bread and fig paste by midweek. Now, let's take a quirky turn. Some scholars believe that the lady of the house also oversaw the home's spiritual maintenance. Think offerings to ancestor statues, regular fumigation of evil spirits with incense, and strategic placement of protective amulets near the bed. Basically, she doubled as a spiritual bouncer. You peek inside the pantry. It's more than shelves of lentils and onions. It's her personal economy. She knows exactly how much to trade for a pair of sandals, how much barley it takes to secure a carpenter's visit, and how to stretch one goat's milk through 4 days and 3 arguments. A neighbor arrives to ask for advice. Her daughter's suitor is lazy, smells like sour beer, and might be hiding debt. Hedifears listens carefully, nodding with the weight of someone who's seen many, many mistakes walk through a doorway and borrow perfume. She doesn't judge. But she does suggest that maybe the gods are sending signs, and that maybe the girl should marry the fisherman's son instead. And here's a fringe tidbit. Some ancient Egyptian texts refer to wives as companions or equals, especially in domestic contexts. Not in every household, obviously, but the idea wasn't entirely radical. The Nebet Per wasn't just a wife. She was an anchor, a strategist, a multitasking logistics officer with an eye for subtle social power plays. As the day winds down, you watch Hedefers light the evening oil lamp, then sit on a worn stool and begin combing her granddaughter's hair. It's quiet now. The kind of quiet that only comes after a day well managed and fully survived. The little girl asks her, "Will I be the mistress of the house one day too?" Hedefers doesn't smile, not exactly, but she nods. "If you watch and listen," she says, "you already are." And just like that, it's passed on. Power, not shouted from rooftops, slums, but murmured between braids and bread loaves. The kind of authority you earn with 10,000 small decisions no one applauds. So you head back outside, the night breeze brushing against your cheeks, and glance back at that quiet powerhouse in linen. She may not hold a title carved in gold, but in every corner of that mudbrick home, her name is written, through action, through legacy, through the soft, firm echo of her footsteps on stone. The morning sun glints off jars of golden beer stacked under a shade awning, their clay seals sweating in the heat. You've stumbled into a buzzing side of Egypt that rarely gets the spotlight. Its markets. Loud, dusty, and full of life, this is where the economy breathes. And if you were expecting men to be calling the shots here, surprise, the women are running the show. Literally. Today you're shadowing Nebet, a savvy merchant with one hand on her hip and the other holding a wad of crumpled accounts. She's already sold half her inventory before the temple drums have finished their morning thump. Her specialty? Barley beer. Frothy, fermented, mildly dangerous if left too long in the sun. She doesn't just sell it, she brews it herself, every evening after the house has gone quiet, stirring copper vats like a kitchen alchemist. You follow her stall to stall as she trades a basket of beer jugs for salted fish, then flips that fish into a cloth merchant's lunch in exchange for 2 rolls of coarse linen. One loop around this market, and Nebet has tripled her value and barely broken a sweat. That's the thing about Egyptian market women. They're not just selling. They're negotiating, navigating invisible webs of trust, gossip, and silent alliances like linen-clad chess masters. Historians agree that women in ancient Egypt had surprising economic freedom. They could buy and sell goods, manage labor, sign contracts, and even hire workers for their small-scale businesses. And while most elite records focus on temples and pharaohs, scratch a bit deeper and you find women's names etched on receipts, warehouse logs, and debt tallies. One particularly cool artifact? A signed receipt from a woman who sold 10 jugs of beer to a ship captain headed south, with a note reminding him to return the empty jars or be charged extra. Savage. As Nebet pauses to check her scroll, a list of deliveries, debts, and one slightly passive-aggressive reminder to her husband to pick up sesame, she waves at another woman across the path. That's Kenti, a fig seller, and part of Nebet's informal credit network. If Kenti needs extra barley, she borrows from Nebet. If Nebet's short on honey, Kenti's got her covered. It's not just commerce, it's mutual survival. You notice how they greet each other, not like competitors, but co-conspirators. They lean close to trade jokes, news, and the kind of information no tax official ever hears, like which temple scribe is behind on his payments, or who tried to pass off moldy onions as sun-dried delicacies. Trust me, the real power in this market doesn't wear a badge. It wears braids and carries a reed basket with receipts tucked between onions. Here's your quirky bit. Beer making wasn't just a business, it was spiritual. Hathor was associated with beer, and festivals honoring her sometimes involved, let's say, excessive celebration. Some women brewed beer specifically for temple rituals, delivering jugs marked with divine symbols to ensure the goddess stayed cheerful and maybe a little tipsy. Nebet's business isn't just practical, it's cultural. Her stall is decorated with carved charms for luck, a tiny Bess figurine dangling from the beer jug rack, a bundle of fennel tied with red thread. Each one serves a purpose, warding off bad deals, angry spirits, or annoying tax collectors. Sometimes the line blurs between business sense and magical thinking, but in this world, Why not both? Historians still debate how large-scale women's economic influence really was. Were they middle-tier traders, or could some amass serious wealth? The records are patchy, but the ones that exist show women leasing granaries, managing vineyard workers, and funding boat shipments. You don't do that with pocket change. The noise rises around you, bells from a spice cellar, laughter near a butcher's stall, someone yelling about stolen dates, fruit, not romantic. Through it all, Nebbit moves like a queen through her court, her reed pen flicking across parchment like a sword. By midday, she's made more than most scribes earn in a week. She stores the profits in a locked basket under a linen cloth, then pulls out a small notebook and adds a few notches. She has a plan. Save up, buy the adjoining stall, and expand her beer line to include honey brew for upper-class tastes. She's already got a name picked out. Golden Hathor's Smile. Smart branding. Before you leave, she offers you a sip of her current batch. Warm, a little gritty, but oddly satisfying. First batch is always for the gods, she says with a wink. Seconds for family. Thirds for profit. You laugh, but you don't doubt her theology for a second. You step away from the market, your ears still ringing with the sound of deals, arguments, and flirtations shouted over baskets of leeks. And you realize something. The economy of ancient Egypt doesn't run on copper debens or papyrus scrolls. It runs on the grit, grace, and relentless resourcefulness of women like Nebbit. And if anyone ever tells you history was just kings and pyramids, hand them a beer and tell them who brewed it. You're ushered into a courtyard shimmering with light reflected off sheer linen garments and gold-threaded shawls. Perfume thickens the air, lotus, myrrh, a hint of clove, and someone offers you a goblet of wine before you've even had time to adjust to all the sparkle. Welcome to the noblewoman's world, where influence doesn't march, it glides. Today, you're the invisible guest at a gathering hosted by a woman named Tay, an elite wife of a regional governor, with the calm poise of someone who could command a city or reorganize your spice rack without blinking. She wears a draped robe finer than anything you've ever seen, the linen so sheer it whispers when she moves. You half expect her to levitate. Tay greets her guests, other noble women, some wives of high priests, others daughters of royal architects, with a series of perfectly modulated nods. Not too familiar, not too stiff. These are women who speak fluently in gesture, accessory, and subtle digs hidden beneath compliments. The real ceremony isn't in the wine or the harpist's background music. It's in who's wearing what, who's seated closest to the host, and who gets first pick of the sweet pastries shaped like little scarabs. As you ease into the scene, you realize this isn't just a social visit. It's a linen politics summit. You see, elite women didn't just wear the finest fabrics, they produced them. Linen was currency, status, and tax payment all rolled into one. Households like Tay's had private workshops run by women, producing bolts of linen for temple donations, royal gifts, and family dowries. A high-quality roll could buy influence, favors, even royal proximity. One could argue some temples were more loyal to whoever sent the softest robes than to any particular god. Historians agree that textile production was one of the most significant industries women controlled, both practically and symbolically. Noble women like Tay weren't sitting around embroidering daisies. They were running massive linen operations, managing labor forces of weavers, dyers, and quality checkers. Ever run a small factory with political strings attached and ceremonial deadlines? Tay does it before lunch. The afternoon wears on and the conversation turns subtly to marriage alliances. One guest mentions her daughter has just received an offer from a scribe's family, but she's holding out for someone from the military elite. Another sighs about her son, who's more interested in music than politics. Tay listens, occasionally interjects, and stores every word like precious cargo. These alliances aren't just social, they're strategic. Which family your daughter marries into could determine your influence in temple circles, land rights, or your next invitation to a royal festival. Here's your quirky fact for the day. In some New Kingdom tombs, noble women are depicted with elaborate cone-shaped headdresses that may, or may not, have actually existed. Historians still argue whether they were literal wax cones that melted slowly, releasing perfume, or just symbolic. Either way, Tay's already got a golden version, complete with fake lotus petals. It bounces slightly when she laughs at an extremely subtle joke about a rival's dinner party. As the harpist plays something slow and hypnotic, you catch snippets of conversation about estate issues, property lines disputed by siblings, a granary manager who's been skimming barley, a stolen lapdog that mysteriously turned up wearing a different collar. Through all of it, Tay remains composed. She doesn't need to raise her voice. Her gaze alone does the heavy lifting. One of the women, clearly less refined, brags about her husband's new chariot. Tay smiles graciously, then responds with a cool, "We've recently reupholstered ours in imported Syrian leather. So practical." The burn is so elegant it could be used as temple incense. It becomes obvious that this isn't just about being rich or connected, it's about mastery of presence. Noble women like Tay don't hold office, but they hold court. Through textiles, marriages, rituals, and social gatherings, they steer networks of power. You could call it soft influence, but that would be missing the steel beneath the silk. Historians still debate how much actual political decision-making noble women could wield, especially in dynastic disputes. But evidence shows they controlled estates, influenced succession choices, and even interceded in temple hierarchies. In some cases, letters exist from noble women to officials and priests, requesting action or offering thinly veiled instructions. That's not small talk. That's governance in sandals. As the day wanes, the gathering begins to break apart. Linen-wrapped servants clear empty plates and refill wine cups one last time. The women say their farewells, their hugs careful not to smudge their precisely applied kohl. Tay walks her final guest to the gate, offers a blessing to her household, and as she turns back, the breeze catches the edge of her robe and lifts it like a banner. You realize then, this woman will never be pharaoh. Her name won't be carved in stone on temple walls, but her choices, alliances, and linens will ripple through families, temples, and courts like the Nile in flood season. And when history tries to flatten her into a decorative footnote, Tay will still be here, in every finely woven thread, in every politically potent wedding, in every deal inked on soft papyrus over sweet date wine. You followed gold-threaded robes and kohl-lined eyes through bustling markets and linen parlors, but now you're stepping into a space far more rarefied and somehow even quieter. The air smells like papyrus, sandalwood, and the faintest whiff of tension. Because here, behind veils and within private palace walls, sit the women who might just run Egypt without ever sitting on its throne, the queen mothers. Today, you're shadowing Mutamwiya, the mother of a young pharaoh. Her son's name is whispered with awe and a little fear through temple halls. But her name? That carries weight in a different register. She doesn't lead the army or raise the crook and flail. She advises, she influences, she endures. The title Mutnasut, Mother of the King, was no idle courtesy. These women often came from noble or royal bloodlines themselves and rose to immense power behind the throne. While their sons were busy maintaining Ma'at, smiting enemies, and inspecting grain taxes, queen mothers were managing succession crises, foreign diplomacy, and quite possibly the cooks. This morning, Mutamwiya is seated in a shaded chamber, her hands resting on a scroll sent from the temple at Karnak. There's trouble in the priesthood. A new high priest of Amun is being installed, and his loyalties are, let's say, unproven. Her son wants to support him, but she's not convinced. And let's be real, her eyebrow raise alone could flatten that priest's entire future. Historians still debate how directly queen mothers influenced state affairs, especially in the absence of formal titles. But in the royal court, influence didn't always walk through the front door. It slipped in with dinner, with lullabies, with careful timing. A whispered warning here, a well-timed favor there, and suddenly the king is reconsidering that appointment. You sit quietly as she dictates a message to a scribe, her voice cool and deliberate. It's phrased as a gentle inquiry, but beneath the softness is a dagger. She wants the priest delayed, and she will get her way. It's diplomacy through lace. Or, well, linen. But it wasn't all whispers and clever glances. Some queen mothers wielded power openly, especially when their sons were too young to rule. Take Amos Nefertari, for example. She was co-regent for her son and later deified as a goddess of protection. Her statues show her in the same size as male pharaohs, a visual mic drop in stone. And here's your fringe tidbit. There's speculation that some of these royal mothers played a role in choosing brides for their sons, not just for dynastic purity, but for political usefulness. Marrying the daughter of a powerful vizier? That's not romance, it's consolidation. Mutamwia knows this. She's already eyeing a girl from a priestly family for her son's next favor. Read political tether. She moves with subtle purpose as she prepares for a meeting with foreign envoys. Her son will make the official statements, but she's already coached him on tone, posture, and exactly how many gold bracelets to wear so as to impress without looking desperate. Every detail matters. Too much perfume says indulgence, too little suggests weakness. And if the envoys look her in the eye, that's not disrespect, that's recognition. You glance around her private chambers. The walls are painted with scenes of Isis and Horus, another powerful mother-son pair, eternally bound in mutual legacy. It's not lost on anyone here. The myth is a blueprint. The Queen Mother isn't just the one who gave life to the ruler, she's the one who keeps him human, centered, sometimes alive. Later, she visits a shrine tucked away in a quiet corridor. There, she lays an offering to Tauret, the hippo-shaped goddess of motherhood and childbirth. Not out of nostalgia, but perhaps gratitude. Her power didn't begin when her son took the throne. It started with every sleepless night she endured when he was a colicky toddler. Every political dinner she sat through with a silent smile, every enemy she outlasted simply by staying present. You wonder what she's lost in the process. No one talks about the Queen Mother's loneliness. Her friends can't treat her the same anymore. Her husband, if he's still alive, is politically irrelevant. Her joy, likely tied to her son's choices, good or disastrous. But her gaze never softens. She knows what's at stake. And if you're thinking this role sounds passive, think again. In some periods, inscriptions credit Queen Mothers with commissioning monuments, temples, and military tributes. Some even had their own courts, servants, and diplomatic correspondence. The palace may not have called them rulers, but they ruled nonetheless. As the sun dips lower and shadows stretch across the marbled courtyard, Mutamwia returns to her quarters. She's tired, but not in the way that sleep can fix. She sits before a mirror of polished bronze, not to admire her reflection, but to practice her expression for tomorrow's ceremony. Strength, poise, maybe just a hint of disappointment, because she doesn't rule Egypt, she rules the ruler. Section 12, the first thing you notice is the beard. It's stiff, false, and absolutely fabulous, tied to the chin of a woman standing tall before a sandstone pylon, flanked by priests and stone-carved soldiers. Her name is Hatshepsut. Her title? Pharaoh. Not queen, not consort. Pharaoh. You've arrived at the apex of what some would call audacity and others call genius. Because Hatshepsut didn't just inherit power, she claimed it, reshaped it, and walked straight into history, wearing a crown that wasn't supposed to fit her head. She strides through the court of Karnak Temple, her linen robes expertly pleated, her kohl applied with the precision of someone who's had to outwit everyone just to stand where she does. Around her, people bow low, not just in formality, but in a weird blend of reverence and wait. Can she do that? Yes. Yes, she can. And she does. Originally, Hatshepsut began her rule as regent for her stepson, Thutmose III, who was a little too busy being a literal toddler to manage foreign diplomacy. But instead of stepping back when he came of age, she leaned in, hard. Over time, her titles evolved. She was no longer just King's great wife or God's wife of Amun. She became His Majesty. Sculptures of her began to change, first showing her as female with royal regalia, then gradually morphing into fully male iconography, complete with that signature ceremonial beard. Historians still argue whether this transformation was strategic gender politics, religious necessity, or sheer survival in a patriarchal framework. Was she pretending to be male, or was she redefining kingship itself? Honestly, it depends on which tomb wall you ask. You follow her through the temple corridors, where reliefs depict her divine birth. Yes, she literally commissioned artwork showing the god Amun visiting her mother's bedchamber. Just a typical family slideshow. The point? Her rule wasn't just legal, it was divinely ordained. Try arguing with a god. But here's the truly wild part. She wasn't just a placeholder ruler. She was one of Egypt's most successful pharaohs. Under her reign, trade flourished. She reopened routes to Punt, a mysterious and fragrant land likely somewhere near modern-day Somalia, bringing back incense, gold, ivory, baboons, and one extremely awkward giraffe that reportedly hated boat travel. She built more monuments than many kings. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is carved directly into the cliffs, a marvel of architecture and ambition that seems to whisper, "Remember me, even if they try to erase me." Spoiler, they did try, but we'll get there. You stop at one of the many scenes showing her standing beside male gods, receiving the Ankh of life. There's no hesitation in her posture. She's not pretending to belong. She does. Still, Hatshepsut walked a razor's edge. She maintained traditional ceremonies. She allowed her co-ruler Thutmose III to hold symbolic titles. She didn't claim to destroy the patriarchy. She just worked around it, outsmarted it, bedazzled it with obelisks. Here's a quirky little note. She even had her own scent. Archaeologists found remains of a perfume believed to be used in her court, made from myrrh and other resins. Imagine walking into a room and smelling like power, politics, and imported sap. But power always comes at a cost. After her death, someone, probably Thutmose III, or more likely his advisors, attempted to erase her legacy. Her statues were smashed, her name chiseled off monuments, her image literally scraped out of history like she was never meant to be more than a footnote. Why? Some say it was vengeance. Others argue it was politics, an effort to restore the proper male line of succession. Or maybe the idea of a successful female pharaoh was too dangerous to leave behind, too powerful a blueprint for others to follow. Historians still debate whether this erasure was ordered by Thutmose himself or whether it happened generations later, a kind of cultural course correction. Either way, it failed. Because here you are, watching Hatshepsut stride through stone, breathing in that scent of crushed myrrh and rebellion, her legacy more intact than ever. As the sun lowers behind her massive obelisks, the tallest in Egypt, by the way, you catch her pausing at the top of the temple steps. Her face is calm, unreadable, but her presence, unshakable. And it hits you. She wasn't playing a role. She was writing a new one. One that said women could rule not by exception, but by excellence. Not because they were allowed, but because they insisted. She turns away, disappears into shadow, and you're left blinking at a sky that suddenly feels too small for what just walked beneath it. Section 13. The morning in Thebes is dry and bright, the kind of sun that bleaches the tops of tomb walls and draws buzzing flies to every clay jar left unattended. You're not in a palace today. No perfumed noblewomen or towering obelisks here. Instead, you're in the cramped home of a widow named Huyet. No titles, no servants, no safety net. Just quiet determination and a pair of sandals worn thin from walking the same stone path every day. Huyet wakes early, not out of spiritual devotion, but because she has things to do and people who'll shortchange her if she shows up late. Her husband, a limestone carver, died 3 years ago, leaving behind a modest debt and 2 sons, one with a persistent cough. She's managed to hold on to their tiny house by weaving mats, grinding barley, and on better days, helping the local midwife for a few debens and a loaf of bread. She stretches her back, pulls her scarf over hair still dusted with flour from last night, and steps out into the alley with the calm of someone who knows no one's going to come save her. You follow her through the artisans' district. This part of Thebes, particularly near Deir el-Medina, was a hive of working-class life. Masons, painters, scribes, these were the folks who carved the pharaoh's tombs, but lived lives etched with hardship, not hieroglyphs. Their wives, women like Huyet, kept those lives from unraveling. And let's be clear, Huyet isn't a helpless figure draped in black. She's a quiet force. She's negotiated with priests to keep her son enrolled in temple school. She's leveraged her husband's old connections to get occasional work mending tools or sorting pigments. Her network isn't formal, but it's effective. When she passes by the granary, the steward nods in her direction, not because she's owed anything, but because she once helped his niece through a rough labor. Historians still argue about how much economic independence lower-class widows really had. Some point to legal rights. Yes, technically women could inherit and manage property. Others argue that in practice, especially among the poor, survival came down to social leverage more than law. If you had people who trusted you, you got by. If you didn't, you starved. Huyet, as it happens, has built trust like a temple wall, one mud brick at a time. Today she's got a small batch of lentil flour to sell, made from surplus she ground herself. She carries it in a basket lined with old cloth, moving quickly through the alleys, dodging goats and small children, occasionally pausing to adjust the knot in her sash. She doesn't smile much, but she nods at the right people. She keeps her ears open. You stop with her near a small shrine to tower it. It's chipped and faded, tucked into a corner where two walls meet awkwardly. Huyet lights a bit of incense, barely more than a scrap, and murmurs something under her breath. You lean in, expecting a prayer for help, but instead she says, "Keep my sons honest, keep me strong, that's all." Her faith isn't grand or loud, it's practical, and somewhere between ancient theology and daily survival, she finds balance. Here's your quirky tidbit for the day. There's evidence that some women, especially widows, acted as informal scribes or dispute settlers in artisan communities, not officially recognized, but respected. One woman's house in Deir el-Medina had scratched records on the walls, lists of lentils owed, dates of births, maybe even a court testimony or two. Huyet could easily be one of those women, half mat weaver, half neighborhood memory bank. As the sun rises higher, she sells her flour for just enough to buy some dried fish and onions. She tucks away a small portion of the copper she receives, not because she doesn't need it, but because she's saving up to repair the roof, again. You follow her home in the early afternoon, the heat thick and clingy. She waves off a neighbor's offer to rest in the shade, too much to do, and disappears back into the rhythm of sweeping, sorting, planning. There's no monument for Huyet. No statue will bear her likeness. She won't be remembered by name, except maybe in the margins of someone else's story. But as you sit on the edge of her threshold and listen to her boys bicker over a chipped game board, you realize she's carved her own kind of legacy through quiet grit, steady hands, and the refusal to vanish. The power of Egypt's women wasn't always sung in hymns or painted on tomb walls. Sometimes it boiled lentils over a low fire, counted every grain of barley twice, and carried 2 sons on her back, while the Nile rose and fell like breath. You're sitting on a cool dirt floor, staring at what looks like a bundle of ivory twigs tied together with faded string. But look closer. Each sliver is carved with tiny, precise figures. Frogs, lions, lotus flowers, coiled snakes. This is no child's toy. It's a wand, a magical one. And tonight you're stepping into a space where medicine, mythology, and maternal hope intertwine with something older than science, ritual. Welcome to the world of ancient Egyptian fertility magic. The woman holding the wand is Henut, a healer and ritual specialist, or what we might call a community witch doctor, priestess, or midwife, depending on who's asking. Her client today is a nervous young wife named Dedu, who's been married for over a year and has yet to conceive. That's not just a family concern, it's a cosmic imbalance. Children weren't simply a blessing, they were insurance, legacy, and proof that the gods hadn't forgotten you. Henut moves with practiced ease. She lays out her tools, an ivory wand carved with protective deities, a figurine of Hathor, and a jar of what smells like honey, garlic, and optimism. There's also a fish-shaped amulet made from faience, said to bring fertility. Odd choice? Maybe. But in Egypt, fish were potent symbols of life and regeneration. It's basically the original baby-on-board talisman. You watch as Henut begins to chant, drawing chalky symbols on the ground. Ankhs, eyes, wavy water lines. Each word is old, powerful, passed down through countless women's mouths, tweaked for dialect but never stripped of purpose. She circles Dedu with the wand, flicking it gently toward her stomach, hips, head. It's not just theater, it's legacy. Historians still debate whether fertility rituals like this were standardized or wildly local, but the records we do have, on ostraka, papyri, even graffiti, suggest they were deeply woven into domestic life. These weren't rogue mystics. Women like Henut were essential. They bridged the gap between temples and kitchens, between myth and biology. Henut dips her fingers into a jar of ointment and rubs a small dollop onto Dedu's wrists. You lean closer and catch the scent of fenugreek and fig resin, likely a homemade salve, part herbology, part placebo, all hope. Then comes the whisper, "Let Hathor's milk flow through you." Simple, direct, timeless. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. In some healing rituals, women would urinate on barley and emmer wheat seeds to test for pregnancy. If the grain sprouted, the woman was considered pregnant. Modern science tested this method in the 20th century, and shockingly, it works about 70% of the time. So yes, ancient Egypt had its version of a pea on a stick test, only more agricultural. Henut also pulls out a scroll, a thin strip of papyrus with a spell written in hieratic script. She reads it aloud slowly, rhythmically. Every fifth word she pauses, letting the weight settle in the space. Dedu is crying now, silently. Not from fear, but release. You feel something shift. It's not just about having a baby. It's about being seen, held, believed. Outside, the moon rises slowly over the rooftops. Somewhere, a goat bleats with terrible timing. A breeze curls into the room, rustling the corner of the spell scroll. Henut presses a lump of beeswax into Dedu's hand. Place this beneath your bed, she says, and sleep facing west. Why west? Because that's where the sun sets, where life returns to the womb of the earth before being born anew. You can't help but notice how many layers are at work here. There's medicine, herbs and tonics, pressure and ointment. There's spirituality, deities invoked, amulets placed, chants repeated. And then there's something more subtle, emotional architecture. The understanding that women needed to feel in control of their bodies, even in times when control was a scarce commodity. Henut gathers her tools slowly, deliberately. Nothing is rushed. She leaves behind 2 bundles, one of papyrus strips soaked in pomegranate juice, another of acacia bark. The first was believed to regulate cycles. The second, a rudimentary contraceptive. Yes, you read that right. Ancient Egyptians also tried not to get pregnant sometimes, and they had recipes for that too. And here's your fringe detail. One medical papyrus describes inserting a paste made of crocodile dung and honey into the birth canal as a contraceptive. Effective? Debatable. Traumatizing? Likely. But it shows that even then, women sought control over reproduction. And that knowledge, no matter how strange, was power. As you step into the night air, the stars feel closer somehow. The ritual is over, but its weight lingers. Dedu walks beside you, fingers brushing the charm hidden beneath her robe. She might conceive, she might not, but she's not alone. She carries a history of women who have tried, cried, prayed, brewed, and whispered their way through the same journey. And Henut? She returns to her home, where more scrolls await, more bundles, more women needing more than just a diagnosis. Because in this world, healing isn't science alone. It's song, scent, and soft light in the dark. The air tonight is heavy with perfume. Rose, cinnamon, a touch of myrrh. It curls through the corridors like a lover's whisper, soft and intentional. You're not in a market or a shrine this time. You're stepping into something far more intimate. A quiet room behind closed shutters, where words are written not in law or liturgy, but in longing. You're here with a woman named Satsabek, stretched out on a woven mat, a stylus in her hand, and a half-finished poem scratched into a strip of linen. Her braids are loose. Her sandals lie forgotten by the door. And she is in love, or at least lust, and she's not afraid to write it down. Ancient Egyptian love poems are some of the most underrated treasures left behind by this civilization. They're not stiff or formal. They are vibrant, sensual, and surprisingly funny. Lines like, "My heart flutters hastily when I think of my love," share space with metaphors about honey, crocodiles, and what can only be described as bold, vegetable-based innuendo. Satsobek leans over and dips her stylus in black ink. She's composing something for her neighbor, a temple musician with eyes like polished obsidian and arms that apparently remind her of the pillars of Karnak. You don't question her taste. You just admire the way she lets herself feel and record it. She's not alone. Love poetry was a popular form of expression for both men and women, especially during the New Kingdom period. The poems weren't always formal literature. Many were likely performed aloud, passed between lovers, or even scrawled as graffiti on walls. Yes, graffiti. Imagine strolling through a tomb and finding a note that reads, "My heart is with you, like the river in flood." Historians still debate whether these poems were mostly male-authored fantasies or true expressions by women, but some texts clearly adopt a feminine voice, filled with agency, desire, and cheeky self-awareness. "I shall lie down and dream that he comes to me," one line reads, "my heart ready like the Nile in flood." Yowza. You sit beside Satsobek as she massages scented oil into her arms, carefully mixed from lotus petals, almond, and crushed date. She closes her eyes, lets the fragrance rise. Perfume wasn't just hygiene, It was seduction, ritual, identity. Women stored it in carved alabaster jars, shaped like doves or blooming papyrus. Some wore their favorite scent in tiny wax cones on their heads during festivals, melting slowly as the night heated up. Imagine slow-release body mist, but with divine flair. And here's your quirky nugget. The ancient Egyptians had a word for body odor that roughly translates to bad sweat of the underarm. A paste of boiled citrus peel, ground frankincense, and powdered acacia. So basically, even your ancestors were worried about date night BO. Satsobek finishes her poem, rolls it carefully, and tucks it beneath a jar near her window. She doesn't need to send it. The act of writing it is enough. Tomorrow, maybe she'll smile at the musician by the riverbank. Maybe he'll smile back. Or maybe she'll just savor the privacy of her feelings, locked safely in ink. You walk with her through the quiet courtyard. A festival is coming soon. One honoring Hathor, goddess of love and music. There'll be dancing, beer, and long looks across lamp-lit floors. Satsobek is already planning which necklace to wear. Something with turquoise. Something that says, "I noticed you noticing me." Here's the secret no one tells you about ancient Egypt. Desire wasn't shameful. It was natural, human, even divine. The gods had lovers. They got jealous. They made mistakes. Relationships were messy, beautiful, and powerful. The word for love, murmured, was often paired with ankh, life. To love was to live, fully. Of course, not every story was a happy one. Sometimes love ended in heartbreak, betrayal, or poetic overthinking. Looking at you, scribes who wrote 6 stanzas about a single glance. But even that was honored. Written, sung, preserved in ink, or scratched on stone. You pass by another home, where a young wife argues playfully with her husband over a missed dinner. She tosses a date at his head. He catches it in his mouth and bows dramatically. In the world of these women, affection wasn't always grand. It was woven into daily rhythms, casual insults, shared figs, and the exact way someone touched your wrist during a prayer. You end your night back where you began, under the stars. The Nile sighs in the distance. A breeze carries the scent of perfume and freshly baked barley cakes. Somewhere someone is composing another poem, maybe about love, maybe about longing, maybe about both. And you realize, in a civilization built on permanence, pyramids, stone, gods carved into cliff faces, these soft, fleeting emotions were cherished too. Love was a kind of magic. Temporary, yes, but deeply real. And Satsobek, she's not just a woman in love. She's a writer, a dreamer, a believer that ink can hold what the heart dares not say aloud. Section 6th morning. It's mid-morning, and you're sitting awkwardly on a woven mat across from 2 people who are trying very hard not to make eye contact. There's bread on the table, a clay pot of date beer, some old fruit no one's touching. It should feel like a celebration, but instead it feels like a silent standoff. Welcome to an ancient Egyptian divorce. The woman's name is Renpet, and she's had enough. Her husband, Amos, isn't violent or cruel, just unreliable. Late with grain payments, keeps losing tools. And last week, he forgot their anniversary again. Renpet doesn't want a lecture. She wants her linen bolts, her dowry land, and her independence back. And here's the thing, she can get it. In ancient Egypt, marriage wasn't bound by a divine contract or rigid doctrine. It was a civil agreement, entered freely, and more importantly, ended freely. No court of shamed relatives, no scarlet letters, just a written document, a few witnesses, and the practical division of stuff. It wasn't always fun, but it wasn't forbidden either. Renpet's father is here too, more out of politeness than enforcement. He pours himself a cup of beer and mutters about the heat. Meanwhile, a scribe unrolls a modest strip of papyrus and prepares to write, "She shall take her belongings with her. He shall not withhold her share." No drama, just logistics. Historians agree. Egyptian women had the legal right to initiate divorce and to walk away with property, including what they brought into the marriage. That might include goats, land, jewelry, or even servants. If she contributed to the household, she had a right to her portion. No long trials, no public shame, just handshakes and maybe some pointed glares. Of course, emotions weren't left outside with the sandals. Renpet's voice trembles when she says, "He never listens." Amos tries to protest, something about stress at the quarry. But it's clear this isn't about one bad day. It's about feeling invisible in your own home, which, honestly, transcends time. Here's your quirky bit of trivia. Some ancient Egyptian divorce settlements included weirdly specific clauses. One preserved case involved a wife getting custody of the family cat and all the cooking utensils, while another specified that the husband had to leave her alone during festivals. Priorities. Renpet takes one last sip of her beer, signs her name with the steadiness of someone who's done hard things before, and stands. She doesn't cry. She doesn't gloat. She just leaves, carrying a clay jar of barley, a necklace of turquoise beads, and a future she's willing to shape herself. The home she's leaving behind isn't grand. Just 2 rooms, a courtyard, a faded painting of Hathor on the far wall. But every inch of it was earned, swept, cooked in, slept in, and now left behind with intention. Historians still argue about how common divorce really was. Was it a frequent practice or more of a legal formality rarely invoked? The truth is likely somewhere in between. Among the elite, marriages were strategic and sticky, but for working-class families, the freedom to part ways seems to have been more accepted than many modern cultures would expect. Outside, Renpet meets her sister, who's been watching from a discreet distance. They exchange a look, not pity, not judgment, just recognition. They've both seen how fragile domestic life can be when love is replaced by obligation. You walk with them through a nearby market. Renpet stops at a stall and buys a tiny figurine of Bastet, the cat-headed goddess of protection, especially for women in households. She tucks it into her satchel without a word. And here's something lovely. Not every woman who left a marriage did so alone. Families, especially maternal ones, often welcomed their daughters back. Women could live independently or with relatives, continue trades, or even remarry if they chose. Widowhood, divorce, single motherhood, these weren't social exiles. They were chapters, tough ones, sure, but not disqualifying. By late afternoon, Renpet is sweeping the floor of her new room, a small annex beside her sister's house. The sun filters through the reed curtain in golden stripes. She sets her own lamp, lights her own fire, sits down cross-legged with a loaf of bread she baked herself. No judgment, no apologies, just a woman who walked away when the story stopped serving her and started a new one with flour-dusted hands and a little help from the goddess of cats. You're in a room that smells like crushed herbs, warm oil, and something sharp you can't quite place. Maybe garlic, maybe ground flint. It's dimly lit, quiet except for the rhythmic grinding of a stone pestle. Welcome to the domain of the Siwi Nobut, the healer, and today, she's a woman. Her name is Sahur, and she's leaning over a low table scattered with bowls, vials, and a scroll so delicate it looks like it might exhale dust. She's reading from what's called the Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, a copy of it, Egypt's oldest known medical text focused entirely on women's health. It's got everything from fertility tips to contraceptive concoctions to headache cures involving roasted mouse and honey we do not recommend. Sahur isn't a priestess or noble. She's what we might now call a community medical worker, trained by her mother, who was trained by her mother, and so on. She doesn't wear a fancy headdress, just a tightly braided bun, a simple amulet around her neck, and the air of someone who's been asked, "What is this rash?" far too many times. Today, her patient is a woman named Dadia, a new mother with a fever and painful swelling after childbirth. Sahur kneels beside her, gently palpating her belly, murmuring phrases of comfort while mixing a poultice from honey, moldy bread, yes, penicillin adjacent, and carob resin. It looks questionable, smells worse, but it works. Historians agree that Egyptian women played a key role in early medicine, especially in areas like childbirth, fertility, menstruation, and female anatomy. While temple physicians, usually male, handled royal or priestly cases, community women like Sahur filled the vital gap for everyone else. And honestly, they probably knew more about vaginas than the gods themselves. Sahur consults her scroll again. The Kahun Papyrus offers dozens of treatments, some practical, some magical, some disturbingly experimental. There are remedies for wandering wombs, a now debunked idea that the uterus could move around the body like a moody pet, as well as spells to restore menstrual flow, and even a diagnostic trick involving garlic inserted in certain areas. If the breath smells of garlic the next day, pregnancy is unlikely. No, really. You watch Sahur scribble a quick note on a piece of scrap linen with a reed pen. It's a list of symptoms, something she'll file with her collection of case notes, her private record of herbs tried, results observed, and prayers recited. Her practice isn't just medicine, it's experiment, memory, and a little intuition honed over years of trial, error, and very loud birth stories. Here's your quirky detail for the day. Ancient Egyptian doctors sometimes diagnosed pregnancy by watering barley and emmer with a woman's urine to see which would sprout first. If barley sprouted, it was a boy. Emmer, a girl. If nothing sprouted, not pregnant. Strangely enough, modern science suggests this method might have had some accidental legitimacy. Score 1 for team intuition. Back in the hut, Sahur gives Dedia a warm drink made of dates, cinnamon, and boiled water from a sacred spring. Something soothing, a little magical, and likely better than anything in a plastic bottle. Dedia's baby wails in the background, swaddled in linen that's been dabbed with oil and stuffed with a sprig of mint to keep flies away. Sahur smiles faintly and moves toward a shelf lined with jars, each marked with tiny painted glyphs. You recognize some: Ankh for life, Nefer for beauty, and Sem for health. This isn't just her medicine cabinet. It's her toolbox, her legacy, her quiet rebellion against mortality in a world where childbirth was as dangerous as war. Historians still debate how formally women like Sahur were trained. Did they attend temple workshops, apprenticeships, learn entirely from older women? The evidence is scattered, fragments of names on tomb walls, mentions in papyri, faint echoes of women who wrote nothing down because they were too busy doing. But their fingerprints are everywhere, on surviving medical texts, in temple records of lady healers, and in the stories passed from one generation to the next. Sahur is one link in a long chain of women who may never be remembered by name, but who kept others alive with knowledge, empathy, and a slightly terrifying herb garden. By evening, Dedia is resting, her fever reduced, her baby snoring against her chest. Sahuri packs up her tools, mutters a blessing to Sekhmet, the lion-headed goddess of both healing and plague, and tucks her scroll away beneath a basket of dried figs. You walk with her into the twilight. She's tired. Not dramatically, just in the way someone gets when they've held too many lives in their hands and remembered every single one. And as the stars rise, you realize, while the temples built statues of gods, women like Sahur built something just as lasting. Quiet trust, one healing touch at a time. There's a storm in the sky tonight. Not lightning or thunder, but something more electric. You can feel it in the air, prickling your skin, whispering through the stone halls of the temple where you now stand. Candles flicker. Incense curls upward like snakes of smoke, and you sense power. Not the soft domestic kind, the kind with teeth. Tonight, you're not following a mortal woman. You're stepping into the divine realm where Egyptian goddesses don't smile politely from altars. They roar, they seduce, they demand. Welcome to the pantheon of feminine power, goddesses who refuse to stay quiet. Let's start with Sekhmet. Picture a lion-headed woman crowned with a solar disk, eyes always narrowed, mouth fixed in a not-quite snarl. Sekhmet was the goddess of war, healing, and plagues, which, yes, is a confusing combo until you remember how close those three things can sit. According to myth, Ra once sent her to punish humanity for disrespect. She did such a thorough job that the gods had to get her blackout drunk on dyed beer just to stop the carnage. You heard that right. The gods had to trick her into chilling out. That's the kind of energy Sekhmet brings. She isn't cruel, she's justice with claws. And many women in ancient Egypt worshipped her, prayed to her, even wore her image around their necks when they needed strength. You'd want Sekhmet on your side if your in-laws were getting a little too bold. Now swing to the other end of the cosmic spectrum, Hathor. You might remember her from earlier, goddess of love, music, fertility, and joy. But don't let the flower crowns fool you. Hathor could destroy as easily as she could bless. In fact, Sekhmet is sometimes considered a wrathful form of Hathor. Talk about a mood swing. Women across Egypt turned to Hathor when giving birth, finding love, or planning a seduction. Her temples were full of priestesses who played music, danced, and performed rituals designed to call down her favor. And let's be clear, these weren't fun-time girls. They were spiritual conductors, cultural powerhouses. When they danced, they weren't entertaining. They were invoking. Here's your quirky detail of the night. In some temples, women would rattle a sistrum, a musical instrument shaped like a doorway, to honor Hathor. The sound was believed to scare away evil spirits and awaken divine joy. It's the ancient Egyptian version of ringing a bell to realign the vibes. But not all goddesses came with golden jewelry and perfumed offerings. Some arrived in smoke and shadows. Take Nephthys, often described as the quiet, mysterious sister of Isis. She didn't get the love songs or festivals, she got the funerals. Nephthys was the goddess of mourning, of boundaries between life and death. Women who prepared the dead often invoked her name, wrapping the body while murmuring her chants. She wasn't dramatic, she was patient, soft-voiced, necessary. And then there's Isis. Oh, Isis. She's the blueprint for about half the myths in the Western world. Loyal wife, grieving mother, master sorceress. She outwitted Ra, resurrected Osiris, raised Horus alone, and basically held the cosmic order together with palm fiber and divine grit. Her magic was legendary, so much so that even male priests needed her symbols carved on their tools to perform healing rites. Historians still debate how much the power of these goddesses translated to everyday women. Was divine femininity aspirational, or did it actually empower the women who invoked it? The answer, as always, is probably yes to both. The goddesses weren't just stories, they were permission. Permission to grieve, to rage, to seduce, to protect, to be complicated. You follow a group of women into a side chamber of the temple. They light candles, draw symbols on the floor in honey and wine. One woman raises her hands and begins a chant that rises slowly like smoke. It's an invocation to Hathor, but it ends in a verse for Sekhmet. You realize these aren't separate goddesses, they're facets, like the women invoking them. One is here because her sister is sick, another because her lover left, another still, silent, wide-eyed, because she doesn't know what else to do. In this sacred space, none of that matters. Every pain, every wish, every hunger is valid, offered, seen. And here's your fringe fact. Women sometimes called on goddess power during legal disputes. Amulets bearing the image of Isis were worn into court, not for drama but for protection and maybe a little cosmic intimidation. You'd think twice about cheating someone wearing a necklace shaped like divine vengeance. As the ritual ends, the women pour libations of beer onto the temple floor. One by one, they whisper their thanks. Their breath mixes with the incense. Their voices linger in the stone. Outside, the stars have multiplied. The wind smells like copper and cloves. You stand in the shadow of Sekhmet's statue, her stone eyes catching just enough moonlight to remind you who she is. And suddenly, you understand. Egyptian women didn't just worship goddesses, they were them. Fragmented, fierce, and fully divine. The courtroom is nothing like what you expect. No grand columns, no wig-wearing judges, just a rectangular mudbrick room filled with men in linen kilts, a few benches, and a cluster of scrolls stacked like yesterday's laundry. But front and center, drawing every eye as she walks in without apology, is a woman named Tiahanut, sharp-tongued, eyeliner flawless, and ready to win a land dispute before lunchtime. You've entered the rarely glimpsed world of women in the Egyptian legal system. And spoiler alert, they weren't silent background players. Tiahanut isn't here as a witness or someone's plus one. She's the plaintiff, and she's suing her late husband's brother for trying to seize the field of barley she's cultivated for years. Her argument? That the field was legally deeded to her as part of her marriage settlement, and now she wants it back. With interest. And possibly a public apology. The court scribe adjusts his stylus. The presiding judge, likely a high-ranking official or temple clerk, asks her to speak. Tiahanut steps forward and does not miss a beat. She unrolls a worn contract, carefully preserved, creased at the edges, and points directly to the clause about property rights. Her voice is even. Controlled. You can practically hear the inner monologue. Don't smudge your coal. Don't let him interrupt. Speak like Ma'at is listening. Historians agree that ancient Egyptian women could represent themselves in court with no need for a male intermediary. This was virtually unheard of in most other ancient societies. Women here could own property, sue for damages, sign contracts, and testify under oath. In legal matters, at least on paper, their voices were as valid as any man's. Still, there's a world of nuance beneath the ink. Winning a case often depended not just on the law, but on perception, family status, and whether you could prove your point with the right paperwork or the right prayers. Because yes, legal rituals sometimes included invoking gods like Ma'at, the feather-headed goddess of truth and balance. Courtrooms often had her image displayed, reminding everyone that cosmic order was the ultimate judge. Tiahuanaut calls her next move a witness, another woman. Her neighbor, Raniferet, who helped harvest the disputed barley and remembers exactly when the land changed hands. Her testimony is short but detailed, full of those tiny truths that scream authenticity. We baked the first bread from that field on the day of the first inundation. And the judge nods slightly. Meanwhile, her brother-in-law glares, clearly unprepared for this level of organized rebuttal. You're not surprised. He probably thought she'd come crying, not clutching receipts. Here's your quirky courtroom tidbit. In some cases, women would dab a bit of perfumed oil behind their ears before entering court. Not to seduce, but to signal status and composure. Smelling good meant you were put together, clean, and in control. Tiahuanaut smells like blue lotus and quiet vengeance. And if you're wondering whether female defendants ever won, oh, they did. Several preserved court records describe women who won disputes over grain theft, domestic abuse, dowry disagreements, and temple donations. Sometimes they even brought cases against temples, which is like suing a combination of the IRS, the church, and your landlord all at once. Historians still debate how evenly justice was applied. Did elite women fare better than peasant women? Almost certainly. Did the system always respect women's voices? Probably not. But the framework existed. The scrolls show it. The scribes wrote it down. And women like Tiahuanaut used it with full confidence. Back in the courtroom, the judge speaks. The land, he declares, is hers. Her brother-in-law must return it immediately, along with the last season's profits and a written apology carved into wood, because sometimes papyrus fades, but wood stays shady forever. Tiahuanaut doesn't gloat. She just nods, takes her contract, and adjusts the fold of her robe like a woman who's just dusted off injustice. You walk with her out of the courtroom and into the brightness of the afternoon. She doesn't smile until they're 2 streets away. Then it breaks across her face like sunlight over the Nile. You pass by a wall where someone has scratched a rough drawing, 2 women holding hands, standing under the scales of Ma'at. It's not official art, it's just a sketch, but the meaning is clear. In this world, law wasn't only for kings and scribes, it was for widows, wives, daughters, fighters. Women didn't whisper for justice. They walked into the room, applied their lip color, and spoke it into being. The desert wind shifts, carrying the scent of unfamiliar spices, frankincense, pine resin, maybe even cinnamon. You're not in a typical Egyptian village today. You're entering a compound near the edge of the royal palace in Thebes, and everything here hums with the tension of politics disguised as silk. You're about to meet someone who knows this delicate dance better than most, a foreign wife of the pharaoh. Her name is Keluhama, and she's a princess from Mitanni, a kingdom far to the northeast in what's now part of Syria. She arrived in Egypt with a train of servants, dowry gifts taller than she is, and just enough instructions from her father to make your stomach hurt. She's not here for love. She's here as part of a political alliance between 2 superpowers, cemented not by treaties, but by her own body in silence. You find her in her private quarters, unbraiding her hair while listening to her handmaid read a letter from home. Her Egyptian is fluent now, but the accent never quite faded. Neither did the caution in her eyes. Keluhama isn't a queen, at least not officially. She's one of the foreign wives, a group of noblewomen from surrounding regions married into the Egyptian royal family to strengthen trade agreements and keep borders friendly. They don't hold official power, but they're far from powerless. She lives in a world of velvet rules. She must not upstage the chief queen. She must not show favoritism toward her homeland. She must bear sons, smile at festivals, and learn when to speak in public and when to let her jewelry do the talking. Her dowry alone includes entire shipments of horses, textiles, and rare trees, olive, cedar, myrrh saplings, each one a whisper of diplomacy. Historians still argue whether these women live like honored guests or glorified prisoners. The records are contradictory. Letters from foreign kings beg Pharaoh to treat their daughters well, while some palace scrolls describe luxurious lives filled with gold, music, and moonlit gardens. The truth likely lives somewhere between strategy and silk. Keluhama leans over her writing board, penning a response to her cousin back home. She chooses her words carefully. knowing a single wrong phrase could be interpreted as disloyalty. At the same time, she's been quietly collecting allies, other foreign wives, sympathetic priestesses, even a few trusted scribes. Her room is neutral ground, where politics are whispered between verses of poetry and served with honey cakes. You're there long enough to notice the little things, how her Egyptian maid bows slightly less than she used to, how Keluhama's furniture has shifted subtly, now arranged in Egyptian style, how her Mitanni bracelets lie in a wooden box, kept but no longer worn. She's adapting, not erasing herself, just blending, surviving. And here's your quirky fact. Some foreign princesses brought their own gods with them. Small household idols carried across miles of desert and displayed discreetly in private altars. Keluhama keeps hers tucked behind a jar of scented oil, an image of Hepat, mother goddess of the sky, eyes wide and hands outstretched. Every morning she leaves a sprig of myrtle beside the statue, just in case anyone's still listening. Today, a letter arrives from Pharaoh himself. He requests her presence at a banquet next week, formal, high profile, and full of implications. The chief queen will be there, of course, as will several royal daughters and a suspiciously specific list of noblemen. It's not a friendly invite. It's a test. Keluhama sighs, not dramatically, just long enough to collect herself. Then she nods to her handmaids and starts selecting her outfit. Something elegant, modest, just the right amount of blue, the Mitanni color of loyalty, but stitched in Egyptian linen, not imported wool. Because that's her life now, balance. Every glance, every robe, every silent moment has weight. Historians note that these foreign wives rarely left written records of their own voices. Their stories come to us in fragments, diplomatic letters, tomb depictions, bureaucratic inventories. But you can feel their presence in the folds of history. They were the quiet fulcrums upon which empires balanced, not warriors but weapons nonetheless. As the sun sets over Thebes, Keluhama sits at her window, watching the palms shift in the breeze. Somewhere out there, armies are moving, borders are being redrawn, kings are plotting. But inside this room, one woman holds her own kind of power, soft, strategic, and deeply human. She fingers the edge of her veil and whispers something you can't quite hear. A prayer, a memory. Or maybe just a reminder to herself, you may not have chosen this path, but you will walk it in gold. It's festival season in Thebes, and you can hear it before you see it. Drums thudding like a heartbeat, flutes winding between bursts of laughter, and a chorus of clapping hands keeping time with the rhythm of sandals slapping stone. The city pulses with celebration. You're swept into a tide of bodies moving toward the temple square, and at the center of it all, eyes painted, hips swaying, arms lifted to the gods, are the dancers. Tonight you're with Mary, a temple performer preparing for the festival of Opet. Her body glistens with scented oil, and her linen sash is tied tight, both for style and for keeping her costume in place once the dancing starts. She adjusts the strands of blue beads around her neck, then turns to you with a grin that's half mischief, half focus. The show is about to begin. But this isn't just performance. It's ritual, worship, and for women like her, a complicated kind of power. Mary isn't a priestess. She's a trained dancer, part of a group of women who sing, play music, and move in intricate patterns during temple festivals. These aren't backup dancers. They're the main act when it comes to invoking divine presence. Their job? Call down Hathor's favor with movement, stir the spirits with rhythm, make joy visible. Not a bad job description, unless you count the aching feet and unrelenting social scrutiny. Historians agree that dancing and music in ancient Egypt held deep spiritual meaning. Women were central to these expressions, especially during religious ceremonies. While elite women could become priestesses, dancers often came from less privileged backgrounds. But that didn't mean they lacked influence. They were seen, heard, sometimes desired, sometimes judged. Mary steps barefoot into the stone-paved court, her sistrum, a metal rattle shaped like a portal, shaking in time with the drums. Around her, dozens of other dancers fall into sync. Their feet beat the earth in rhythm with the sacred procession approaching the temple. The statue of Amun is carried overhead, veiled in silk, but everyone's eyes are on the women spinning beneath the banners. You can't look away, and neither can the nobles. That's part of the unspoken equation. These women live in the strange space between reverence and objectification. Their movements are sacred, but their presence is provocative. They command attention, even as whispers ripple through the crowd about who's dancing too freely or smiling too often. Mary knows all of this. She's learned how to control her gaze, how to give just enough without giving too much. She says the goddess taught her that. That moving for the gods teaches you how to move through the world. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some dancers wore tattoos, yes, tattoos, across their thighs or lower backs, often in the shape of Bez, the protective dwarf god. Not because it looked cool, though it kind of did, but to guard them during performances and signal sacred service. Ink as invocation. Protection painted onto the skin. As the sun sets, the dancing intensifies. The musicians shift tempo. Mary's arms ripple like reeds in the wind, and the crowd, hypnotized. Some join in, their movements awkward but joyful. Children shout and throw flower petals. A nobleman watches with narrowed eyes, not cruel, just calculating. Later, Mary will explain that dancers are often invited to elite banquets, sometimes to perform, sometimes for less honorable reasons. She's been careful. She sticks to temple work and community celebrations. But she's seen others pulled into palace life, kept by men who praise their talent but control their freedom. A sacred art becomes, in the wrong hands, a transaction. Historians still argue how much autonomy dancers had. Were they respected artisans, exploited entertainers? The truth, as usual, lives in the overlap. A woman like Mary might be admired in one temple, judged in another, envied by some, pitied by others. But tonight she owns the space. Her body moves like water, her eyes gleam with certainty, and the sistrum rattles like a laugh from the gods. After the dance, she walks with you down a quiet alley behind the temple. Her breath is still fast, her cheeks flushed. She presses a bead into your hand, a bit of faience shaped like a lotus. For the next time you forget how to feel beautiful, she says. Then she disappears into the dark, her bare feet whispering secrets to the earth. You lean against the wall, the noise of the festival still ringing in your ears. And it hits you. Performance in ancient Egypt wasn't just entertainment, it was risk, offering, communion. And women like Mary, they didn't dance to please, they danced to become. The smell hits first, resin, myrrh, and something unmistakably like time itself. You're standing at the threshold of a mortuary house in western Thebes, where the desert meets the cliffs, and silence hangs heavier than the stone walls surrounding you. Someone has died. And here in ancient Egypt, that doesn't mean they're gone. It means the women of the household are about to get to work. Meet Bakhet, the eldest daughter of the deceased, her dark linen dress tied tight at the waist, eyes rimmed with smeared coal. She's not just grieving, she's in charge. Because when death comes to the door, Egyptian women are the ones who carry the soul across the threshold of eternity. Inside, the preparation begins. The male embalmers will handle the messy physical parts, removing organs, stuffing the body with linen, applying natron for drying. But the emotional labor, the mourning, the prayers, the legacy, that's Bakhet's domain. You watch as she leads the kites, a pair of ritual mourners, usually women, hired or appointed to wail, weep, and channel the grief of the family. One of them tears her dress. The other throws sand in her hair. Their cries echo like temple bells cracked with sorrow. It's a performance, yes, but also a necessary rite. Mourning wasn't a suggestion, it was a responsibility. Tears were offerings. Screams were signal flares to the gods, announcing a soul was on its way. Historians agree that women were central to Egyptian funerary practice, not just as mourners, but as caretakers of memory. The deceased's wife, mother, or daughters would ensure offerings were made, festivals observed, and that the soul's name continued to be spoken, because to be forgotten was to truly die. Bakhet kneels beside her father's body, now wrapped in hundreds of layers of linen. She touches the amulet at his throat, an eye of Horus, and whispers something low, rhythmic. A spell? A goodbye? Maybe both. You follow her to the tomb site, a modest cliffside chamber etched with his life. Him plowing the field, him drinking beer, him receiving bread from the gods. And there, small but unmistakable, Bakhet is pictured too, offering incense, holding flowers, carrying on the bond beyond death. And here's your quirky detail. Egyptians believed in a second death, which occurred when a person's name was no longer spoken. That's why women like Bakhet made sure their loved ones were remembered, not just buried. They led festivals, cleaned tombs, recited prayers. One common refrain was, "May your name live through me." A promise, a vow, a form of resurrection. The funeral procession begins. Women carry jars of beer, baskets of bread, a few of his favorite things. Baquette walks just behind the coffin, flanked by her sisters. There are no priests guiding the ceremony, just the family, just the women. They sing hymns to Isis and Nephthys, two divine sisters who mourned their murdered brother Osiris, the original mourners, the first to scream the gods awake. Historians still debate the status of professional mourners. Were they respected, pitied, merely tolerated? But what's clear is that their role was vital. Whether hired or heartfelt, they were seen as vessels for the grief that needed to be expressed to balance Ma'at. As the tomb is sealed, Baket steps forward. She sprinkles water, a symbol of rebirth, lights incense, speaks the name of the dead 3 times, each one louder than the last. Then silence, a final offering. You walk back with her under the weight of sunset. The Nile glows in the distance, a vein of life pulsing through the desert. The funeral is over, but Baket's work is not. She will return here in the months and years to come, leaving flowers, food, sometimes poems scratched into limestone, small reminders that he is not forgotten. In Egypt, death wasn't an ending. It was a transfer of duty. The living must now protect the dead. And women, they were the bridge, the keepers of memory, the mourners and the midwives of the afterlife. As night falls, Baquette sits outside her home, the mourning scarf loose around her shoulders. Her youngest child crawls into her lap. She hums a tune, something soft and cyclical. It might be the same one her mother sang to her after her own loss. You realize, watching her silhouette against the stars, that even in death, Egyptian women shaped legacy. With hands full of flowers and eyes rimmed in black, they made sure the dead still mattered. And in doing so, they made themselves immortal too. You're standing beneath a sandstone overhang in a place so quiet you can hear the scratch of your own heartbeat. But listen closer. There's another sound, a faint brush of something sharp against rock. You move toward it, careful not to kick loose a pebble. And there it is. Graffiti. Not the modern kind. Not initials in spray paint or a bored teenager's doodle. This is a name, carved neatly in hieratic script. A woman's name. Hidden near the edge of a tomb wall in Deir el-Medina. A whisper carved in limestone. A reminder, I was here too. This section of the workers' village on the west bank of the Nile is where tomb builders lived, painters, stonecutters, architects. Their work filled the royal necropolis with some of the most beautiful tombs Egypt has ever known. But behind every painted god and royal scene were families, and behind those families always were women. You follow one such woman, Nebetset, the wife of a painter. She rises before dawn to bake bread, tend the garden, and send her husband off with a kiss that tastes faintly of onion and courage. She knows the work is dangerous. One collapsed shaft, one improperly sealed passage, and he's gone. And yet she sings while she works, something old and rhythmic, passed from mother to daughter. But Nebetset isn't just cooking and sweeping. She's literate, not fully maybe, but enough. Enough to read her husband's sketches, enough to write her name, enough to carve it into history. Historians still argue how widespread female literacy was in ancient Egypt. Some suggest it was rare and limited to elite households or temple communities. But Deir el-Medina was unique. It was an educated village, home to professional scribes and artisans, and where writing flourished, women learned too, even if no one wrote that part down. You move through her home, tiny, clean, filled with jars marked carefully with painted glyphs. She has her own scrolls, her own stylus, her own ideas. She doesn't work on the tombs directly, but she helps her husband mix paints, sort tools, track work schedules. And sometimes when the courtyard is quiet and the children are asleep, she writes, on potsherds, on scraps of linen. And sometimes, when she's bold, on the very walls that surround her. Here's your quirky detail. Archaeologists have found graffiti in tombs that clearly came from women. Not all of it's poetic. Some is devotional. Some is just names. One simply reads, Henut was here on the beautiful festival of the valley. It's not Shakespeare. It's presence. And presence matters. In a society obsessed with memory, where to be remembered was to be immortal, carving your name was an act of rebellion. Especially if you were a woman, especially if your stories were always in someone else's handwriting. Nebetset walks you to a rock face not far from the village. There, just beside a funerary chapel, she points to a crude carving, an image of the goddess Hathor, arms outstretched. Beneath it, a short line of hieratic script. It's a prayer, not for her husband, for herself. May Hathor guide me to the western lands. May my name be spoken in joy. She doesn't need permission to hope. Historians have long framed these women as wives of workers, a label that sticks like poorly mixed plaster. But inscriptions suggest more. Records show women acting as witnesses in land transactions, borrowing grain, hosting rituals, and yes, writing, quietly, illicitly, authentically. You sit with Nebuchadnezzar at dusk, a shared cup of beer between you. She talks about her children, about the paint colors they're experimenting with in the tombs, how the new red pigment stains fingers for days. She laughs, then grows quiet. My husband paints kings, she says, but I dream of painting myself. You believe her. The stars rise over the cliffs, wind slides through the stones like breath. Somewhere another woman scratches her name into the corner of a tomb wall, careful not to wake the overseers. It's not grand, it's not legal, it's not even meant to last forever. But it does, because even when the statues fall and the scrolls crumble, the scratches remain. Proof that someone, some woman, once stood in this place, looked at the vast male-shaped world around her, and said, I am here. I see. I write. The room is dim, the air thick with incense and candle smoke. You sit cross-legged on a woven mat beside a collection of broken statues, fragmented scrolls, and a single unwrapped doll-sized sarcophagus. A museum storeroom? Not quite. You're in the echo chamber of ancient history, the space where historians gather shards, stitch theories, and wrestle with ghosts. Tonight, you're not walking beside a named woman. You're walking with the unknowns. The half-glimpsed, the could-have-beens, the thousands of Egyptian women whose stories never made it onto walls, scrolls, or museum placards, but who undeniably were there. And that includes the ones we've already met. Their stories, their fragments too, reconstructed from contracts, temple records, graffiti, family tombs. For every Nebuchadnezzar or Renpet we can trace, there are countless unnamed women, mothers, weavers, midwives, dancers, who moved through Egypt like wind through papyrus, present, vital, but mostly unrecorded. Historians still argue, vigorously, sometimes spicily, over how to interpret the data. Did Egyptian women truly have more rights than their counterparts in Greece or Mesopotamia? Were those rights real in practice, or just generous laws buried in administrative scrolls, while social norms kept women quiet? The legal record is promising. We've talked about divorce rights, property ownership, business dealings, and court access. But scrolls don't feel shame or fear or social pressure. What's on the record doesn't always capture what played out in living rooms, temple courtyards, or back alley markets. You watch as a scholar opens a worn papyrus, half of it missing, the glyphs faded to brown whispers. She reads slowly, lips moving in tandem with thought. It's a prayer, maybe, or a tax record. It mentions a woman's name, Tahemet, and a measure of barley. But was she a buyer, a scribe, or just someone standing nearby? This is the problem and the power of ancient women's history. You're chasing shadows. Sometimes those shadows are sharp and detailed. Other times they dissolve just as you reach for them. Take the role of women in temples. In some dynasties, priestesses flourished. In others, they vanished from the record entirely. Were they banned, forgotten, out of fashion? One era reveres God's wife of Amun like a divine partner. Another barely mentions her. It's like tuning into a radio that crackles in and out with static. And literacy, still debated. Were scribal women common in villages like Deir el-Medina, or rare exceptions? A few names suggest female scribes existed, like Nefertari, the chief chantress and scribe of the temple. But how many of those girls copying love poems on ostraka were students, and how many were just playing? Here's your quirky fact tonight. Archaeologists once discovered a cache of dolls buried with a young girl, one of which had a tiny scroll strapped to its back. Some believe it was just a toy. Others think it was a funerary spell, an attempt by someone to give a little girl knowledge in the next life. Maybe they hoped she'd be a scribe in the afterworld, but for every item found, 100 are lost. Most of what we know comes from the tombs of the elite, the temple archives, the noble inscriptions. The poor, the ordinary, the stubbornly undocumented. Their stories are encoded in wear patterns on combs, in the way cooking pots were repaired. in the fingernail dents on a half-burned grinding stone. You walk through the metaphoric storeroom now, brushing your fingers along objects that once belonged to someone real. A bronze hairpin, a string of cracked faience beads, a letter from a woman to her son that reads, "Send barley. I'm not well." That's it. That's her entire appearance in the record. But can you feel the weight of her life in just those words? It makes you wonder, what are we missing? What assumptions do we bring? If a woman's name wasn't carved in stone, does that mean she was powerless or just unrecorded? In Egypt, a society so devoted to memory, it's easy to forget how many names never made it past the ink. But here's the radical truth whispered by every chipped figurine and half-written prayer. The absence of a full record is not the absence of a full life. So historians keep digging, not just into the earth, but into imagination, into empathy, into the belief that even the smallest trace, an amulet, a prayer, a scrawled line of graffiti, can tell us something profound. Because when you piece it all together, when you hold the sacred with the domestic, the legal with the whispered, the famous with the forgotten, you don't get a flat image of women in ancient Egypt. You get a mosaic, uneven, gorgeous, incomplete, but unmistakably alive. You step back from the table where the fragments rest. Behind you, the wind stirs a reed curtain. Somewhere, a name long buried rises to the surface of your mind like a lotus breaking water, and you whisper it, just in case remembering is the most sacred act of all. The sky over the Nile is soft now, painted with that particular shade of lavender you only get at the end of a long sun-worn day. The river glows like liquid bronze. You stand once again on the banks of the water that has seen everything, and remember that girl from the beginning, humming to her baby under a reed roof. She's still here in a way. Tonight, you're with another young woman, Layet, walking slowly down the river path, her basket empty, her thoughts full. She's no queen, no priestess, no painted tomb figure. She's a weaver's apprentice who's just started spinning linen fine enough to be sold at the temple market. Her fingers are raw, her shoulders ache, but there's a lightness in her step. Because now you see it, how her life too is laced into everything. How women like her held up the world, stitch by stitch, whisper by whisper. She passes by other women, older ones weaving mats, girls practicing dance steps behind a courtyard wall, a widow lighting incense at a family shrine. You've walked beside all of them over these nights. You've seen how they move not just within the system of ancient Egypt, but through it. Sometimes silently, sometimes boldly, always with intention. And it's funny, isn't it? For a culture obsessed with death, so much of Egyptian womanhood was about life. Creating it, feeding it, dressing it, healing it, negotiating it, remembering it. Even in death, they kept on tending the living, through prayers, rituals, and the simple act of being remembered. Layet stops by the water and looks down at her reflection, faint, flickering, carried on currents. Her face could be anyone's, a priestess from Heliopolis, a beer brewer from Aswan, a princess married into politics, a market seller who carved her name into a temple stone just once, just to prove she existed. That's the thing. They all did, and together they built a civilization so enduring that it still calls to us across 5,000 years. Not just with pyramids and gold masks, but with the quiet, tenacious rhythm of the women who kept everything running. Remember that noblewoman who stitched influence into dinner party seating? The dancer who rattled the gods awake? The healer who mixed moldy bread and honey into a miracle? The queen mother who ruled through her son's silence? The girl who sang to her unborn child under a flickering oil lamp? Each of them was a thread. And now you can see the tapestry they made, bright with resilience, flawed, unfinished, but unmistakably theirs. Here's your final quirky truth. In some tombs, archaeologists have found women buried with mirrors, makeup palettes, and hairpins alongside sacred texts and protective amulets. Objects of beauty, yes, but also of identity. The women of Egypt didn't separate the sacred from the ordinary. They brought the sacred into the ordinary every day, through every braid, every birth, every bread loaf. Layet turns to go home, the wind catching her shawl like a sail. In her basket, tucked under a fold of linen, is something new, a scrap of papyrus with a name she's practiced writing all week.